Are you seriously telling me that this Air Force rigger is going to supervise my men on a high-altitude infill? Colonel, with all due respect, is this some kind of elaborate practical joke? The words, dripping with condescension, echoed off the corrugated steel walls of the rigger's shed. The crowd of Navy SEALs and Marine Force recon operators, mountains of muscle and quiet menace, rippled with hushed, complicit laughter. They shifted their weight, the sound of their gear a low growl of agreement. In the center of their circle of judgment stood Master Sergeant Ava Rostova. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. Her attention was surgically focused on the intricate workings of an M3 oxygen regulator, her hands moving with a watchmaker's precision. But from the corner of the hangar, Colonel Davies, a man whose face was a roadmap of forgotten conflicts, watched her hands, watched her posture, and a flicker of something ancient and knowing crossed his eyes. He saw something they all missed. If you believe that true respect is earned in silence and proven by action, type competence in the comments below. The air in the rigger shed at Nellis Air Force Base was thick with a volatile mixture of jet fuel, ozone, and testosterone. It was a place of work, a cathedral of canvas and cord where the sacred rites of parachute packing were performed. But tonight, it was a courtroom, and Master Sergeant Rostova was on trial. Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, a bulldog of a man whose neck was as thick as his prejudice, acted as the prosecution. He paced before his assembled operators, a collection of the nation's most elite warfighters, using Rostova as a prop for his lesson in institutional arrogance. "Look at her," he boomed, gesturing with a contemptuous thumb. "They send us a glorified seamstress from the chair force to oversee a complex halo operation. A high-altitude low opening jump, gentlemen. Not a field trip. We are dropping from 30,000 feet in near-total darkness with experimental breathing apparatus. This isn't packing gym bags for a weekend retreat. This is the sharp end of the spear." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, each one a small stone cast at the silent woman. The SEALs, men accustomed to being the undisputed alphas in any room, grinned. They saw a small, focused woman in a sterile blue uniform, a stark contrast to their own mud-caked, operational camouflage. They saw a technician, a support element, not a peer. They saw what Thorne told them to see, an outsider, an obstacle, a box checker sent by a bureaucracy that didn't understand their world. Ava Rostova remained an island of calm in a sea of derision. Her world had shrunk to the delicate diaphragm and polished chrome of the regulator in her hands. Her focus was absolute, a form of meditation she had perfected over thousands of hours in similar sheds across the globe. The noise, the insults, the palpable wave of doubt washing over her. It was all just weather, a passing storm that had no bearing on the mission. Her mission was the equipment. Her purpose was perfection. Every click of the dial, every turn of the specialized wrench in her gloved hand was a verse in a prayer for safety. She felt the slight, almost imperceptible grit in the threading of a valve, a microscopic imperfection that a less practiced hand would have missed entirely. It was a grain of sand in a finely tuned engine, a potential point of catastrophic failure at an altitude where the air was too thin to sustain conscious thought. She didn't announce her finding. She didn't look to Thorne for approval. She simply disassembled the component, cleaned it with a solvent-dampened cloth, and reassembled it with the fluid, economical movements of a master artisan. The click it made upon seating was now clean, crisp, and perfect. That single, silent act of competence was her only reply. It was a statement made not with her voice, but with her hands. It said, "You see a seamstress. I see the half-millimeter flaw that could kill your best man. We are not the same." Colonel Davies saw it all. He saw the way she held the wrench, not like a mechanic, but like a surgeon holding a scalpel. He saw the worn patch on her bag, a faded, almost ghostly emblem of the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, a unit so deep in the black world of special operations that its very existence was a classified secret. And he knew the storm was not the gunny shouting. The real storm was the quiet woman in the center of the room, and she was about to make landfall. The lesson was coming, and it would be delivered not in a classroom, but from 30,000 feet in the dead of night. The initial briefing had been for a standard halo jump, a routine if inherently dangerous exercise. But as the C-130 Hercules lumbered into the black, star-dusted sky, the mission parameters changed with a sickening lurch and the sudden, terrifying silence of two port-side engines sputtering out. A simulated emergency had just become terrifyingly real. "We've got a multiple engine failure. Flame out on 2 and 3. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, strained but steady. "We are a dead stick. I can hold altitude for 90 seconds. Maybe. The ramp will be green for 5 seconds. 5 seconds only. After that, we are a glider, and you are cargo." A wave of adrenaline-laced dread washed through the aircraft's belly. 5 seconds. A normal jump window was 30 seconds. 5 seconds was an eternity and no time at all. It was a window so tight it was considered impossible to safely exit an entire team of 12 operators. Gunny Thorne's lead jumpmaster, a seasoned SEAL with a dozen combat jumps, went pale under the dim red glow of the cabin lights. His eyes were wide, his confident swagger gone, replaced by the stark realization of the mathematics of death. He looked at the line of men, at the single exit, at the stopwatch in his hand, and he froze. The intricate calculus of wind speed, exit separation, and the aircraft's degrading performance was too much. He was about to scream, "NO go," the abort call that would scrub the mission and admit defeat. But through the rising tension, a voice cut through, calm and clear as a bell. "Gunny, request permission to take the door." It was Master Sergeant Rostova. She stood near the ramp, her expression unreadable, her posture radiating an unnerving tranquility. Thorne stared at her, his mind struggling to process the request. The seamstress, the tech, was asking to take control of a catastrophic situation that had just paralyzed his most experienced jumper. His pride warred with the survival instinct of his men. He looked at his jumpmaster's frozen face, then back at the quiet confidence in Rostova's eyes. There was no time for argument, no space for ego. There was only the dying aircraft and the 5-second window to oblivion. He gave a single, jerky nod. "The door is yours, Master Sergeant." What happened next would be seared into the memory of every man on that plane. Rostova didn't move to the jumpmaster's traditional position. Instead, she took 2 steps back, placing herself at a strange angle to the ramp. She wasn't looking at the men. She was feeling the aircraft through the soles of her boots, her head tilted as if listening to a secret conversation between the wind and the groaning fuselage. She raised a single hand, finger splayed. The red light was on. The klaxon for ramp deployment blared. The massive ramp lowered, revealing a chaotic vortex of wind and blackness. Instead of the loud, guttural go, 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 the men were expecting, there was only silence from Rostova. The green light flashed on. In that instant, she didn't shout. She made a series of small, precise hand gestures, a symphony of command that seemed to slow time itself. A finger jab for the first man, a slight wrist flick for the second, a subtle dip of her chin for the third and fourth, who went out almost as one. It wasn't a panicked evacuation. It was a choreographed ballet. She was reading the violent eddies of air over the ramp, adjusting her timing by milliseconds to place each jumper into the smoothest possible column of air. She was a human fire control computer processing dozens of variables in real time. The last SEAL cleared the ramp just as the green light flickered and died. The total time for all 12 men, 38 seconds. An impossibility. Then, with a final methodical check of her own gear, Ava Rostova simply stepped off the edge and vanished into the night. On the flight deck, Colonel Davies watched the telemetry feeds from the jumper's GPS trackers. He wasn't breathing. He saw 12 distinct icons pop up on his screen, then another. All 13 were stable, their canopies deployed at the correct altitude. They were descending not in a scattered, panicked line, but in a tight, geometrically perfect constellation. "Holy," the co-pilot whispered, his voice full of awe. "Their dispersion is less than 50 meters. From a dead stick drop. That's not possible." Davies allowed himself a small, grim smile. "With a normal jumpmaster, you're right," he said, his eyes still glued to the screen showing a 13th icon, Rostova's, descending with flawless precision. "It's not down below, on the dusty, moonlit expanse of the Nevada desert." Gunny Thorne experienced a similar crisis of faith. He had a rough landing, a consequence of the chaotic exit he'd anticipated. He got to his feet, cursing, expecting to spend the next hour rounding up his men, scattered across a square mile of wilderness. Instead, he saw them, all of them. They were standing in a loose circle, not more than 100 feet from his position, collapsing their canopies as if they had just completed a routine jump in broad daylight. They were all on the X, the exact center of the designated drop zone. It was a drop of such breathtaking perfection that it defied the laws of physics and probability. Thorne looked at his men, their faces a mixture of relief, confusion, and dawning wonder. Then he looked up at the vast, empty sky, searching for the final, 13th canopy. He felt a profound and deeply unsettling sensation creep up his spine. It was the chilling realization that his entire worldview, his carefully constructed hierarchy of competence and strength, had just been utterly and irrevocably demolished by a quiet woman he had dismissed less than an hour ago. The silence of the desert was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own shattered arrogance. The debriefing hangar buzzed with an energy that was part exhaustion, part adrenaline, and part pure, unadulterated shock. The SEALs and Marines, usually boisterous and loud after a successful operation, were clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed, reverent tones. They kept glancing toward the back of the room where Master Sergeant Rostova was quietly and methodically inspecting the very parachutes that had just saved their lives, her movements as serene as if she were folding laundry. Gunny Thorne stood alone, leaning against a stack of equipment cases, his face a mask of grim introspection. He avoided everyone's gaze, the architect of the evening's humiliation, now its most prominent victim. The double doors at the front of the hangar swung open, and Colonel Davies strode in, his presence immediately commanding the room to silence. He didn't walk to the podium. He walked to the center of the floor, his boots echoing with quiet authority. He surveyed the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on Thorne, then on the SEALs, and finally settling on Rostova at the back. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We need to discuss what happened tonight." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "There seems to be some confusion about the chain of command, about expertise, and about the Air Force tech who was assigned to your team." With a nod to a waiting technician, the main projection screen behind him flickered to life. It displayed a single, stark document, a United States Air Force personnel file. The name at the top of the file was Rostova, AVA Master Sergeant. Colonel Davies picked up a remote, his thumb hovering over the button. "Gunny Thorne, you were concerned about Master Sergeant Rostova's qualifications. You described her as a glorified seamstress. Let's clarify her job description, shall we?" He clicked the remote. The screen zoomed in on a block of text. The narrator's voice in every man's head read the words as they appeared, each one a hammer blow to their preconceived notions. Unit designation, 24th Special Tactics Squadron. The room went dead silent. The 24th wasn't just elite, it was ethereal, a Tier 1 unit that operated in the same shadowy strata as Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. They were the ghosts who enabled the ghosts. Davies clicked again. Primary specialty, Special Operations Rigger and Jump Master. He clicked again. Secondary specialty, Advanced Weapons and Tactics Instructor. Click. Combat Jump 157. The number hung in the air, an impossible figure. Most of the men in the room were proud of their dozen or 2 dozen jumps. Click. Notable awards, Silver Star. The air hissed out of the room as if from a punctured lung. A Silver Star, the 3rd highest award for valor in combat, was not given for packing parachutes. It was earned in blood and fire. Click. Mission classification, Top Secret / code word. The screen was filled with black, redacted lines, entire operations and deployments hidden from view, their secrecy a testament to their importance. Davies let the screen linger for a moment, the black bars speaking more loudly than any text could. Then, he zoomed in on one final, unredacted entry. Project Lead and Chief Developer, AM, 3 High Altitude Oxygen Regulator System. "Gentlemen," Davies said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. "The experimental equipment you were testing tonight, Master Sergeant Rostova didn't just inspect it. She didn't just check it. She invented it. The schematics for that regulator were born in her mind. She wrote the manual. The flaw she found in your lead jumper's rig before takeoff. The one that would have caused fatal hypoxia at 30,000 feet. She knew to look for it because she knew the precise stress tolerance of every single component in that device. The revelation landed with the force of a physical blow. The men stared at the screen, then back at the unassuming woman who was now carefully coiling a set of suspension lines. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The impossible 38-second exit, the flawless drop pattern, the preternatural calm. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a fluke. It was mastery. It was the quiet, terrifying competence of someone who didn't just understand the rules, but had written them. Colonel Davies turned his body fully towards the back of the hangar. He straightened his uniform, his posture shifting from that of a commander to that of a subordinate. He brought his heels together with a sharp crack. In a stunned silence, he raised his hand in a slow, deliberate, and profoundly respectful salute. Master Sergeant Rostova, he said, his voice ringing with absolute sincerity. On behalf of every man on that aircraft, thank you. Your expertise was decisive. For a moment. Nothing happened. Then one by one, the other officers in the room, majors, captains, lieutenants, turned and saluted. The SEAL and Marine NCOs, their faces a mixture of shame and newfound awe, followed suit, snapping to attention and rendering honors. They weren't saluting a rigger. They were saluting a legend they hadn't even known existed. Davies held his salute, then turned his head back to the assembled operators. Assumptions, he said, his voice cold and hard, are the mother of all failures. You assumed branch insignia told you everything you needed to know. You assumed gender told you something about strength. You assumed quiet was weakness. You were wrong on all counts. Master Sergeant Rostova is not support. She is a force multiplier. She is a weapon system in human form. She has forgotten more about getting you to the fight safely than you will ever learn. Let this be the last time any of you makes that mistake. Lesson learned. Dismissed. The story of that night spread not like wildfire, but like a pressure wave from a detonation. Silent, powerful, and utterly transformative. It didn't need to be shouted in the mess hall or boasted about in the barracks. It was transmitted in quiet conversations, in knowing glances between pilots and jumpers, in the sudden, respectful silence that fell over a room whenever Master Sergeant Rostova entered. They called it the Rostova Drop, or the 38-second window. New pilots being certified on the C-130 for special operations missions were told the story by their instructors as a cautionary tale about the unpredictable variables of combat, the most dangerous of which was underestimating the person standing next to you. The legend became a part of the institutional fabric of the base, a modern myth with a clear and potent moral. The SEALs who had been on the flight were changed. Their swagger was still there, but it was tempered now with a quiet humility. They had been humbled not by an enemy or a superior officer, but by sheer, undeniable competence, and the lesson had stuck. They had witnessed something that transcended inter-service rivalry and professional ego. They had seen a master at work, and it had recalibrated their definition of what true expertise looked like. It wasn't about the size of your muscles or the volume of your voice. It was about what you could do when the engines failed and the world was falling apart. The most profound transformation, however, was in Gunnery Sergeant Thorne. For 2 days, he was a ghost. He performed his duties with grim efficiency, but the arrogant fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, troubled look of introspection. He replayed the events over and over in his mind. His condescending words, her placid silence, the impossible perfection of the jump, the damning list of her accomplishments on the screen, the weight of the colonel's salute. It was a systematic dismantling of his entire professional identity. He had built his career on being the toughest, the loudest, the most demanding. He judged men by their grit, their physical presence, their willingness to conform to his warrior ethos. Rostova fit none of those molds, and yet she had demonstrated a level of operational mastery that he could only dream of. On the third day, he found her in the same rigger shed where he had tried to humiliate her. She was alone, meticulously inspecting the stitching on a reserve canopy. He walked in, and the vast space suddenly felt small and intimate. He stopped a respectful 10 feet away. She didn't look up, but he knew she was aware of his presence. He took a breath, the words catching in his throat. He had rehearsed a speech, an apology full of explanations and justifications. But as he stood there, watching her work, he realized how hollow those words would be. He threw the speech away. He stood straight, brought his boots together, and snapped to the position of attention. "Master Sergeant," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its former bluster. It was the voice of a man remade. "I was wrong. My assumptions were unprofessional and dangerous. You saved my men. Thank you." Ava Rostova finally paused her work. She looked up, her eyes meeting his for the first time. There was no triumph in her gaze, no hint of "I told you," so there was only a calm, quiet acceptance. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "We're all on the same team, Gunny," she said softly. "Just doing the job." Then she returned to her inspection, her silence once again saying more than words ever could. The apology was accepted. The lesson was complete. The legend of the Rostova drop created its own artifacts. The cracked M3 oxygen connector, the tiny flaw that could have killed a man, was encased in a block of clear resin by one of the base's machinists. It was mounted on a small wooden plaque and placed on the central workbench in the rigger's shed, the heart of Rostova's domain. Engraved on a small brass plate beneath it were the words, "Rostova's rule. Assumptions are a flaw in the system. Verify with your hands." It became a teaching tool, a physical reminder for every new airman and visiting operator that the smallest details matter, and that expertise is a hands-on discipline. The informal name for the desert drop zone also changed. Navigational charts still listed it as Dizzy Delta 7, but among the pilots and jumpers of the special operations community, it was known only as Rostova's Landing. To stick a landing there on a night jump was considered a mark of exceptional skill, a tribute to the impossible standard she had set. Ava herself, however, remained unchanged. She deflected praise with a quiet shake of her head or a simple, "Just doing my job, sir." She treated the awestruck SEALs with the same professional courtesy she showed the most junior airmen. Her currency was not fame or recognition, but competence. A few days after the incident, a young SEAL, the same one whose life she had saved by finding the flawed regulator, approached her hesitantly. "Master Sergeant," he stammered. "How did you do it?" "The jump. How did you get us all out in time?" Ava looked up from the parachute she was packing, a small smile touching the corner of her lips for the first time. She tapped her temple with a finger. "It's all just math," she said. "Wind shear, drag coefficient, payload weight, decaying airspeed. It's a physics problem. You practice the math until you don't have to think about it anymore. You just feel it." She then showed him a specific knot in the suspension lines. "This is more important," she told him. "This knot holds your life. Learn this. The other stuff is just noise." She was a teacher, a mentor, a quiet professional whose philosophy was woven into every parachute she packed. Mastery is quiet, excellence is a habit, and respect is the natural byproduct of undeniable competence. Months later, a new class of operators filed into the main briefing room for the Joint Terminal Attack Controller course. It was a mixed group of Army Green Berets and Marine Raiders, all of them confident, experienced, and carrying the quiet swagger of their respective elite communities. The instructor who walked to the front of the room was Gunnery Sergeant Thorne, but he was not the same man. The abrasive arrogance was gone, replaced by a measured, authoritative calm. He looked older, wiser. He began the briefing not with a litany of rules or a display of bravado, but by holding up a small, resin-encased object. It was the flawed oxygen connector. "Before we talk about calling and airstrikes," he began, his voice filling the room. "We're going to talk about assumptions." He told them the story. He told them about the C-130, the dead stick emergency, and the impossible 38-second window. He told them about the quiet Air Force Master Sergeant. And he did not spare himself. He was the villain of his own story, the perfect example of ignorant prejudice. I stood on this very base, and I publicly mocked a fellow NCO based on her branch of service, her gender, and the fact that she didn't feel the need to shout about her accomplishments, Thorne said, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the young operators. I saw a technician. I saw a support troop. I was a fool, and my foolishness almost cost 12 good men their lives. The person I had dismissed was, without exaggeration, one of the most qualified and combat-proven individuals I have ever had the honor to serve with. He placed the encased connector on the podium. The quietest person in this room, he continued, leaning forward, is often the one you need to listen to the most. They are not quiet because they are weak or scared. They are quiet because they are observing, they are calculating, and they are not wasting energy on things that do not matter. They are the professionals. Your ego will get you killed. Your assumptions about the person next to you, based on their accent, their uniform, their size, or their gender, will get your team killed. Her competence, he tapped the plaque, will save your life. Never, ever judge an operator by anything other than their actions under pressure. The room was silent, the operators listening with an intensity they rarely afforded their instructors. This was not a lesson from a textbook. This was a scar, a testimony. The story of Ava Rostova had become institutional wisdom, passed down not as a heroic fairy tale, but as a fundamental principle of survival in the high-stakes world they inhabited. True legacy isn't a statue in a courtyard or a nameplate on a door. It's a lesson that takes root and changes the way people think. It's a standard that is passed on, shaping the next generation. Ava Rostova's legacy wasn't just a perfect jump from a dying airplane. It was the profound and lasting shift in culture she had inspired. It was the quiet ripple of her competence that had washed over an entire community, drowning out the loud, corrosive noise of prejudice. Her triumph was the enduring understanding that true strength doesn't need to advertise. It doesn't need to boast. It simply is patient and prepared, waiting for the moment it is needed most, ready to prove its worth not with words, but with silent, perfect, and undeniable action. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.